What we believe as Christians is that Jesus is Lord over everything, that he is the way, the truth, and the life. All things are made by him and through him, and therefore his creation reflects that.
Everything that we're learning about, whether it's science or math or history, literature, there are transcendental truths that show themselves through all those subjects.
I love showing my students the connections between how God sovereignly has ordered all the subjects to glorify him, whether that's through how math, all the numbers work together perfectly. He's an orderly God, or through orthography in the written word. He gave us his word in the form of the Bible, and I try to encourage my students that they can glorify God by learning to read well.
They're talking about the teeny tiny parts of the cell and how does that even fit in the stem of a plant. And I'm able to say, well, our creator God, who pays attention to every single detail, planned it that way. And that's why it is the way it is.
I think we're distinctly marked as Christian because we're going to God's word and we're praying and starting our day with that. And I think starting the day with that is very important.
We pray in our classroom. When we have issues with students, we have them pray together and encourage each other in that way. So I would say that we see, just as we build their character, that we're putting Christ at the center.
God certainly expects a lot of us, and it's not a bad thing that he does, and by his grace he helps us. And so we want to pair high expectations with a loving care for each one of our students and a willingness to come alongside them and push them and encourage them to live up to those standards.
It's challenging academically, but it's also challenging in we want them to be wise, eloquent, virtuous young men and women. So we're looking for mature in heart and mind.
I think it's a character building and sanctifying to kind of be in and over your head a little bit because they have to face a fear they have in themselves that maybe they're not good enough or inadequate in some way. And to be able to prove that wrong over and over and over again has been, I think, one of the biggest areas of growth that I've seen.
Hey y'all, welcome to CrossPolitic on the Fight Laugh Feast Network. If you don't already know, our Prodigal America conference, prodigalamerica.com, is going to be in Fort Worth, and after interviewing Lauren Handy, or not interviewing, we didn't interview her, but talk about Lauren Handy's case this week, and
Paul Vaughn
and everything that's going on. Man,
Siaka Massacre.
Sign up for Prodigal America. Where does America need to repent? We're going to be in Texas, October 31st through November 2nd. We just hope to see you there.
Are you thinking differently about your family's finances and resources while others worry about surviving to the next paycheck? The hand of the diligent will rule, while the slothful will be put to forced labor. Train your mindset to see where God is moving, where to invest and build so you can create, protect, and pass on your wealth to your descendants. What is your plan to use your economic power? Joe Garrissey with Backwards Planning Financial coaches his clients to make this kind of impact on their world for generations by integrating investments, debt, insurance, tax-efficient strategies, and legacy planning. So go to backwardsplanningfinancial.nm.com, backwardsplanningfinancial.nm.com, and connect with him today. Also, you guys need to remember that we have a brand new app, Fight Laugh Feast Pub TV app. If you don't, go download it now. Head on over to your favorite app store, type in CrossPolitic, Fight Laugh Feast, or Pub TV. Once you find the app, you may need to update your app, or if you have an Android phone, you may need to delete your current FLF app and re-download it. Once downloaded, you'll be able to view or listen to our content right on your mobile device. FightLaughFeast.com, FightLaughFeast.com.
Our app's like the Underground Railroad, because like we got canceled from Vimeo, YouTube's difficult with us, and you want to stay connected to us.
Underground
Railroad app.
Really?
You make that connection? You see?
Harriet, tell me, come on, let's go. They got us. Let's get out of here. It's slavery. Be free over here on the app. I don't know if it goes the same.
Hey, we're grateful to have with us Mr. Kyle Seraphin.
He don't know what he's walking into.
On the show. He's the host of the Kyle Seraphin Show. He's a recovering FBI agent, federal whistleblower.
Is there a group for that?
Constitutional extremist, Second Amendment defender, and truth bombardier. Kyle, thanks for joining us on CrossPolitic.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I'm looking forward to it.
Kyle, how long you been a plant?
Yeah, like a house plant.
Like a psyop.
Oh yeah. See, he playing with us.
I always wanted to be a psyop. You know what? My buddies and I always talk about this. It's our favorite game. It's like
I
the
bet
federal
it is.
government is still the federal government. It's not competent.
Yeah.
And it couldn't run an op as good as I am. That's
I
the
don't like
simple
him.
fact of it.
I don't like him. I want him off the show.
You're nervous. You're
That
nervous.
sounds good.
How do we know he's recovering?
So Kyle, you used to work for the FBI. What was that like?
I still be.
And then you, I honestly, I just don't know your story very well. I followed a little bit. I would love to hear.
What's your
kinda
story, Kyle?
I want to hear about it because I think the FBI is public enemy number one with how they've been handling citizens here in America and just submitting to the Biden administration. So, anyways,
Careful, Gabe.
give me from where you started to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. So I agree with you on your initial assessment. I do think they're public enemy number one. I think they're the most dangerous entity for American civil liberties, and that includes your ability to practice your faith in America. So that's my opening take on it. I started in the FBI when I was 35 years old. That was in 2016. Wow. I came from the military. I was in the Air Force. I spent a couple years in between there working as a civilian paramedic, and I enlisted when I was 27. So I'm kind of either a late bloomer or a late system idealist, as my buddy Steve Friend likes to call it, which is to say, I always believed in America. I always thought I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. I was kind of like a moron, and I made it up to 27. And then I was asking God over and over again, what am I creating? What am I destroying? What am I doing with my time here on the earth? The answer was basically nothing. I was a finance analyst at a movie studio, and I worked for Warner Brothers at the time. Good. And I just figured, I got to do something that is serving something greater than myself. I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic schools. I went to a Jesuit school where the motto was "Men for Others," and it hit me when I was like maybe 26 years old. I'm not living for others. I'm living kind of for me, but it kind of sucks. I'm not really doing anything of value. So I enlisted at 27. I went into the Air Force. I came out. Paramedic game, ended up getting married right about that time. My wife and I kind of bounced around, and we basically gave up on working for the FBI, which was one of the goals that I had when I enlisted, is like, maybe I'll come out and do some federal service. Yeah. Gave up on it. And then as my wife and I rented out our apartment and we moved all of our stuff into storage, that's when the FBI comes calling and says, hey, why don't you come and join us? I think God's plan is always visible to me in the rear view. I never understand at the time. At the time, right. It was really a major hassle. A lot of God's plan has been a major hassle for me because I think it's very inconvenient in my timeline. But a lot of it makes sense in the rear view. So I joined in 2016. I go to Quantico. I almost immediately realize that it is not the animal that I hoped it would be. I expected it to be elite. The guys that I've worked with in the Air Force were elite. They were high level physical fitness. They were very competent operators. Like I said, I learned to be a medic there. I was in the Pararescue program to become an emergency rescue paramedic. And then you get to the FBI and it's like fat people and sloppy people and lazy people and government employees like you'd expect. And instead of someone punching me in the face and dropping me on my face to do push-ups and flutter kicks, they were like, lunch is at 1, have a nice tour of the building. And I went like, oh, this is not really what I thought I was getting into. With the FBI, I was assigned to Counterintelligence, which is actually antithetical to American liberties as well. That was my opening assignment. So in December of 2016, I was assigned to the Washington field office in Washington, D.C., and I was assigned to the Chinese threat specifically. So that's what I was investigating, which I found out was basically looking at Chinese spies' email, like their Gmail and their Yahoo accounts, and then incidentally getting Americans' emails back and forth that were being targeted. And then that's what we would actually be really interested in, because the spies, you can't really do anything about. They stay in China. But we were interested in the Americans. And for me, that was a really big problem because it looks like a violation of federal law. I think because it is using FISA and what's called FISA 702. So I got 2 years of experience on that. I ended up on a surveillance team hunting down so-called white supremacists, which are in short supply. I'll just tell you right now.
No, that's not what I heard, bro.
This is northern Idaho.
It's not what I heard.
It's hard to find white supremacists, and they generally look like a 22-year-old kid wearing boat shoes and khaki pants and a polo shirt, and he's like probably on Reddit or Twitter, and he's being a racist online, and then he has an FBI surveillance team watching him at $10,000 a day. Wow. So that's what white supremacy looks like to the FBI.
Bro, go ahead and liberate the rest of black folks. Say it again for all the people in the back. We don't have white supremacists to be mad at or scared of?
There are definitely people that are racist in this country, but the dangerous ones that are committing actual, federal crimes are few and far between, it turns out. It's much easier for the FBI to create those people. And so we would spend months and months watching these guys. And then what they would do is my favorite was this. Like, we'd have we had a guy who was a Marine. and white supremacy minded something. He would wear like a Punisher t-shirt, which I thought was kind of funny because the Punisher was an FBI agent. Anyway, so he's wearing a Punisher t-shirt. He's on a Marine Corps base, and he's supposedly being a real jerk online and talking about how he wants to go shoot black cops. And I don't want to get too specific about the case, but we're following him around. They had a team on him for like 3-4 months. And he never did anything. So they introduced the standard, which is what's called a confidential human informant or a source. And the source gets in there and, says, hey, like, you want to do some racist stuff? And he's like, yeah, kind of, but not really. I kind of want to get out of the Marine Corps. I hate it here. I kind of want to just go like meet a girl and hold hands and maybe get a job. And they're like, yeah. And then you want to shoot up a police station with black cops in it? And he's like, no, like I kind of want to see like, if that girl really likes me, maybe I could keep her around and maybe we could get an apartment together.
Wow.
So they try all these things. They put undercovers into him, trying to get this guy to go forward with it. And at the end of the day, like he probably ends up marrying a black girl and having mixed babies. And that's the real arc of the storyline.
Wait. You're ruining white supremacy for me, bro.
I know it. I'm sorry. It's hard.
You can't even trust a white supremacist online anymore.
No, you can't. Most of them are probably feds. And if you meet anybody that's ISIS online, that's definitely feds. Like they're really, really into that game.
Wow.
Unfortunately, the FBI is like probably the single biggest exporter and also creator of a lot of these terrorism. Because what I found out was the supply is short. They like to create it in so much as they want to instigate it. I'll just give your listeners a free lesson. Please. If you ever meet anybody online that just agrees with all of your worst ideas, especially the violent ones, and wants to help you do them for the exact amount of money that you have, that's a Fed. That's what they look like. So.
Wow.
So wait. How did you worked for the FBI, and then why did you leave? Or how did you leave?
So I started doing what's actually legally defined as whistleblowing activity. Going back to 2017, I started reporting things that I thought were violations of rule, policy, or federal law. That's what a whistleblower is. Yeah. I reported them within the appropriate chains of command, which could be my manager or their manager or the inspector general and so on, office of general counsel. You can also go to Congress. That's where I went eventually. But I started off doing this in 2017. I did another letter in 2019 saying that there were some abuses going on with our surveillance team. That kind of basically just soured me on the entire program. And eventually I'm like, I got to get out of here. Also, I lived through COVID, which was really weird because while they were shutting down the counterterrorism division, and I mean that by saying agents were coming in and working 30 minutes twice a week for like an average of $150,000 a year, they were serving like 1 hour of time. They don't get to factor the commute in. So they were doing that in the Washington field office. I know they did it in others where they shut down. Wow. They did the same thing in the counterintelligence. And they were doing these analyses where they said, for example, in the division I used to be in, counterintelligence, they said, we've got about somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 cases. We've got 100 plus agents that are working them. We need to know which one of them are critical and need daily updates so they can come into the office more frequently. So they did an analysis of this, let's say 1,200 cases. And they looked into every single one of them. And do you guys want to guess just whole number? What was the number of cases that required daily updates because they were so critical?
Zero.
It's more than zero.
I'll go 200.
Okay.
50.
2.
Oh my.
I had the 2 right.
That was close.
I had the 2 right.
Yeah, 0 is the closest, but you still lose on the. Do you win on that on the price?
Yeah, totally. 100%.
Yeah,
100%. I do.
Oh, yeah.
I want to test
So it's a whole number. But 2 cases in the counterintelligence division. This is in Washington, D.C., where you have all the embassies, where you have all the theoretical spies and the possible penetrations of government, where all the government agencies are, set out. Yeah. And there were 2 cases that were of critical importance that required daily updates.
It's
and
amazing.
those were probably espionage cases that were like active and, we were probably actively losing secrets on. So when you look at it, it's like, okay, this animal is not what I thought it was. Like I said, then I got to see about 3 years of doing surveillance, a lot of which was counterterrorism. I went to 20 plus what we call deployments, but they're temporary duties around the country. I started with a so-called white supremacist up in Alaska, and I say that because he just went on a camping trip. That's what I saw. He got on a bush plane and flew away, and we were like, the surveillance is now airborne, and we are groundborne, so it is over. That was the end of that. We were 3.5 hours out in the middle of the bush in Alaska, which was hilarious. One of those great moments where you just see a guy like drive up to a plane, and you're like, I don't think we're going to be able to follow him on that one, and off he goes. So I started there, and I got to see 3 years of this stuff. I was, outside the mosque that was the shooting in Pensacola on the naval base there in, I think it was in 2020, but it could have been late 2019. Okay. So I saw a lot of weird stuff, and none of it made me think like this is a critical agency and it's doing critical work. But I didn't really see how screwed up it was until I actually got away from Washington, D.C., and I took a voluntary transfer to Las Cruces, New Mexico, which is in the United States, much to the surprise of many of the people I worked with. They were like, is that a extraterritorial post? It's like, no, it's New Mexico, bro.
New Mexico.
And So I move out there and I voluntarily asked to be assigned to the Indian reservation and do essentially major crimes. So you get to be kind of like a detective. Right. You get to do what people think the FBI actually does and investigate homicides and make sure that suicides have a full death investigation and corruption and, and major assaults and things like that. And we had some arson cases. So I'm out there doing that game. And right at that time, I get a couple things that hit me at the same time. I think that God knows how hard-headed I am and that I need more than one shove at once. Mm-hmm. And so a couple things happened. Number one, we had the Biden administration say that they were going to be doing the COVID mandates and everyone was going to have to get a shot. And I was a no-go on that right away. I had serious pro-life disagreements with the way that it was developed. I also had some medical concerns. And as someone who's been a paramedic for over a decade, I was like, I don't get it. This doesn't make sense. I already had COVID. I had it in 2020 while I was on duty. And so that was number one. And then the second thing is I was watching the national news very closely. I used to live in Washington, D.C. So unlike people who lived in New Mexico for the most part, I was really tuned into the national and specifically the sort of the DC-based news cycle. Right. And I watched Merrick Garland get out in front of Congress and say that the FBI would not be using what they call Patriot Act tools, but I took to mean counterterrorism resources because those are kind of synonymous. Okay. They weren't going to use those kind of tools against parents that were protesting at school boards. And then 5 days later, we get an email coming down from the assistant director of counterterrorism saying that the FBI has created a new threat tag, which is like a hashtag to put on investigations so that people can go search it easily. That was called EDU officials. And it was specifically about parents threatening school board members. And you're like, well, that's a problem. It's not a problem that the FBI investigates parents at school board meetings if they violate federal law. Sure. But it is a problem if they're going after them for counterterrorism. And one of the drums that I keep beating, and this is why your initial question, is FBI, are they the public enemy number one, is because most people think the FBI is this criminal law enforcement organization that goes after and finds federal crime. But at least 50% and maybe more, probably like 60, 65% of it is actually involved in doing intelligence work, which is where I spend a lot of my time. Mm-hmm. And it's counterterrorism and it's counterintelligence. And those cases are opened up without any allegation of a federal crime. And the minute you gather that our agency is using national security tools to investigate things that are not crimes, you immediately become terrified if you know anything about like world history in the last 200 years.
So Kyle, we just read this. I just researched a little bit of this last week. In 1908 was when the FBI was started, and it was likely started. Yeah, right. It was likely started illegally, but it was originally designed to investigate federal corruption within federal government. Correct?
Yeah, the FBI was, so J. Edgar Hoover joined it very early on. 1908 is the birthday the FBI claims for itself. It's the only federal agency, it's the only organization I've been a part of that claims a birthday that doesn't seem right. It's like it's lying about its birthday. What else is it lying about? Yeah. The FBI was actually created as the Federal Bureau of Investigation in 1935, which they'll openly acknowledge. Right. It was called the Bureau of Investigation in 1908. And when J. Edgar Hoover got involved in it, he actually morphed it to the purposes that took on a lot more responsibilities. They became the armed sort of federal law enforcement that we know of in 1935. Right. So if you're the Army Air Corps and you become the Department of the Air Force, you claim a new birthday. The Air Force's birthday is in 1947. It's not whenever the Army Air Corps was created. And for some reason, the FBI just claims a different birthday, maybe for legitimacy, for more age. Very weird to me. But it was initially created to go after, as you said, corruption in the federal government. When it became the FBI, what they were looking to do is interstate crime. Yeah. And that you have to picture 1930s America. We had radios, but we didn't have the internet. We had, the potential for warrants and federal crimes, but we didn't really have a mechanism to go after them. We had the U.S. Marshal Service, which has been around a long time. We had the U.S. Postal Inspector Service, which was also a federal law enforcement, but we didn't have a group that would basically liaison between different counties and different states when someone, say, robbed a bank in Omaha, Nebraska, and then they drove to Kansas, and then they drove down to, Oklahoma, and then they did it in Texas, and then they hit out in Louisiana. Like, what do you do? Yeah. So the Bonnie and Clyde types, the Dillinger gangs, this is kind of where the FBI really got its big kind of jump in the American psyche, that they were manhunters, even though the Texas Rangers were better. They were manhunters that were running down after these like interstate crimes because we didn't have the ability to pass warrants, and we didn't have what's called mutual aid, and we didn't have agreements between counties and states to be able to go into different jurisdictions. We've solved all those problems, by the way, today. So the real question most Americans should ask is the FBI that we have worth $11 billion when it's not doing the job that it was created for? Because we've grown out of that problem. And it's my question. On new things.
When there's only two very, very essential cases in 2020. You mentioned before the show began that you caught Gabe being arrested during 2020. We had our Psalm Sing protest here. It kind of went viral. Have you, what were your thoughts then? And then have you been watching?
Because you were working for the FBI.
You were still working for the FBI at that point. But then have you been watching the FBI targeting Christians in particular over the last few years?
Yeah, so I'll kind of finish the story, which I got really long-winded on, and I apologize. I was seeing that we had a problem going to Congress. That's what brought me to Congress. I shared with Jim Jordan's committee through my congresswoman that they were investigating these parents and that probably the attorney general had lied. That was my first whistleblower activity. That was in October of 2021. So I had already seen what was going on, and you guys having your situation in Idaho. And so I was tracking this, and it's like, none of this made any sense because I was also in Portland for the protest that happened out there in front of the courthouse, and I was following Antifa targets, and we weren't doing anything about it. But suddenly we're seeing law enforcement engage people over COVID. And I was equally, I was the most aggressive person about COVID tyranny that was in my circle. I would not put on a mask. I would walk the wrong way down the aisles. I don't care.
100%. Yep.
I was in the military. I've done MOP training. I've done jock ups for what they call CBRNE, so chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear. I've had to put on the plastic suit and the mask, and I've also been a guy in a hospital who was working in a total isolation HAPR, where we were looking to do a Ebola response. And so I know what biological protocols look like, and it's not a bandana. As I always tell people, if you can smell a fart through somebody's jeans in an elevator,
you better preach.
You can probably catch a virus through a mask.
You better preach, my guy.
Oh man.
Anyway, so I saw all this stuff going on.
Is that the first time a Catholic's ever gotten an organ?
The tyranny.
I think so.
Go ahead.
So I see that tyranny is a real possibility in law enforcement specifically. And so the FBI actually does training. You'd be shocked to learn, but they take every single person that was an FBI agent to the Holocaust Museum. And they show you that the only way that tyranny triumphs is for men and women who are in positions of minor authority, and I would consider myself that as an FBI agent, and local cops are the same, and your mayor and your city council and your congresspeople, they're all minor authority. All those people have to basically go, I'm going to go along to get along.
Yes.
I'm going to let this happen.
Wow.
The banality of evil. They have to do their job instead of doing what's right. And so I saw that happening. Wow. So when it came to be my turn and they were like, hey, we need you to put a thing up your nose every 72 hours to show that you're a Christian who is pro-life, I kind of had this F no attitude. I'm not going to do that. No way. And at the same time, they also were telling me they were going to investigate parents using national security tools. Yeah. And that was a no-go. So I bring all this stuff out. I was almost immediately removed from the office. And this was in November. November 23rd was my last day in the FBI's office of 2021.
They fired you?
No, they just told me I couldn't come back. I had to take leave forever.
Are you still on the payroll? Because that would be fun.
Well, it was paid until I ran out of vacation time. But then at some point, they also got pissed off because I was still carrying a gun. And so I had to keep qualifying. So I showed up to a qualification while on leave, by the way, paying myself essentially. Yeah. And I went to a qual, but I didn't get a COVID test. And they were like, hey, if you didn't show up with a COVID test, then you're off leave. Now you're on a permanent suspension. And that existed until the Biden administration changed the rules. We got to see them move the goalposts a bunch, including with churches. They did so with COVID restrictions in my office. So I was able to come back to work. So I came back to work for 6 weeks. And then they took my badge and my gun in April of 2022. And that was the last time I was in the office. That was it. They pulled my security clearance was the actual tool because they couldn't come after me in any reasonable way.
So did you get fired?
No, I just got suspended forever with no pay.
We started off this
He is still in the FBI. He is still.
We started off this whole conversation asking if you were a plant. You told me how to identify a plant. You basically said when they start telling you everything you want to hear.
That's right. You're right. Yeah. So here's the real problem.
To hear all this.
I like everything you're telling me, and it's lining up really well.
So here's where it got real spicy for me because I realized I had a couple different options. I had the option of being quiet and getting crushed like everybody does when you do this sort of thing.
Yep.
Or I have a father who was in CBS media. He grew up as a radio broadcaster from the time he was 14 years old on. And I've always seen the power of the media as a tool that can be used if you know how to use it. And so I made a decision with my wife, and we both said, we can be crushed. By the way, my wife was baptized a week before they took my badge and my gun. I don't think that was a coincidence either. My wife from no faith at all, growing up in Brooklyn, New York, with agnostic or atheist parents. Yeah. And then she was like, I'm getting baptized in the church. We did a midnight mass, and she did the full immersion and came out. And she was like, I'm behind you. Whatever happens, we're in this together. You'll figure out how to make a living, even though it's probably not going to be this. So and there's something to be said about having a strong and smart and good woman to back 100%. Your play when you're a man in the world, because it's like Amen. We have plenty of reason to doubt ourselves.
Amen.
And so here I am. I'm suspended forever with no pay. And we could just wait it out and try to do what they call administrative remedies, where you bring different cases and you try to get the Equal Opportunity Board to help you out. And then you ask the Merit Service Protection Board to help you out. And you ask the Office of the Inspector General to help you out. And I did all those things, by the way. And you ask the internal investigators to look for retaliation. And they tell you, well, you're not a whistleblower because we don't want you to be a whistleblower, because that would really ruin our case against you. And you go, okay. So we decided to take it public. And so I started doing whistleblower activities to Congress. I started being a funnel for other people. They would launder information to me, and I would send it on to Congress so that they didn't have their stamp on it. And I did, because I was already removed. What are they going to do to me?
Yeah.
And then in September, I decided to go public with my story on Dan Bongino's podcast. Yeah. And so I flew out. I sold this is how committed we were. We sold our house, and I left the closing table of the only home that we had. So my kids moved into a van and drove to my parents' house in Arizona. We moved into their 2 extra bedrooms. They had a 3-bedroom house. They were only using one of them, so we took the other 2 with a family of 5. And we moved into that, and I flew from the closing table, drove down to the airport in El Paso, flew out to Miami, got a car up to Dan's studio, and taped a 2-hour special for his podcast, telling people what was going on.
I remember that.
I remember that now.
I
do too.
Now, wow. That was like the burning of the bridge, or the crossing of the Rubicon for the FBI, because the minute you start talking like that, you're PNG'd, you're persona non grata, like they cannot talk to you anymore. You're bad. And I had previously put together a group of about 300 people that weren't going to get the COVID shots. They were all pro-life Christians of various flavors. They all had the same attitude that this agency was doing evil, and we needed to do everything we could from the inside to work against it. And I was now on the outside, but I was a voice because I made myself that. And so they started sending me information. And one of the things that people will remember is that I showed that the FBI was looking into Catholics, specifically what they called radical traditionalist Catholics in Richmond, Virginia. That came from that group. That came from a person who's now no longer with the FBI. He was removed for that, by the way. He was removed for showing that the FBI was involved in absolute malfeasance against our First Amendment protected liberty to practice your faith. If you want to do the Latin Mass, you're allowed to do the Latin Mass in America.
Right. Our
government is supposed to be agnostic about it. And instead, they tried to weigh in on it, and they tried to tell you what the good Catholics and the bad Catholics are. We'll leave that debate for another time, gentlemen.
Yeah.
But
how'd you know?
Oh, that's next show.
How did you know?
That's next show.
The government doesn't get to say what that is. They don't get to say that. And the person that brought me that document basically stated straight up front, like, I'm not a Catholic. However, if they can come for radical traditionalist Catholics, it's next. Radical traditionalist Baptists and radical traditionalist Lutherans and Methodists, whatever they decide to call it, Presbyterians. Take your pick. It's radical Christians, because that was never about Catholics. It was about, can we decide what the good and bad religions are? And can we say that they're close to white supremacy? And the reason we know that is because they talked about basic positions like being pro-life, like thinking that LGBTQIA stuff doesn't belong in our government and shouldn't be legislated towards us, that we should be able to choose how our kids are educated and what values we give them, and that our border should be secure for God's sake, and that we shouldn't bring people into poverty here. That's just basic stuff. That's all, like, not just Christian. That's conservative stuff, like, broad with a capital C. So that's what they went after. So that's what people will know me. That's when I burned the last bridge. After you do that, we spawned a couple of congressional investigations. My podcast has been cited by congressional Democrats over and over and over again, dozens and dozens of times in the record, which I find to be absolutely hilarious, because I hope they helped us grow. So I make a living doing that now. So screw them.
The fundamental thing, he lists all these. He's absolutely right. But it's like, basically anybody who thinks there's a standard over the government, a standard that the government has to answer to, the standard that the government has to obey.
That's right.
Then you're a radical.
Yeah, that's right.
Because if there's no standard, if there's nothing above the government is God.
That's right.
And they get to decide. And that's the distinction between radical and non-radical. They don't care if you're milquetoast Catholic or Lutheran or Methodist or whatever, so long as if you leave the state to be God. But as soon as you say there's a standard over God, you're a threat to the state. You're a threat to their supremacy. I got to read this ad, and then you guys can jump in. There's 3 things you need to know about 1689 cigars.
They're amazing. They're amazing. They're amazing.
When you purchase from 1689cigars.com, you help provide jobs for folks in Nicaragua who would otherwise have a very difficult time providing for their families and be reduced to handouts. Second, Every time you enjoy products from 1689cigars.com, you support Reformed church planters in Nicaragua.
That's
And
Presbyterians, Kyle.
Third, 1689cigars.com is owned and operated by bivocational pastors here in the U.S. who resonate with Pastor Charles Spurgeon when he said, "I intend to smoke a good cigar to the glory of God before I go to bed tonight."
You know he's a Presbyterian now.
Because he's living on Jesus right now.
1689cigars.com is honored to partner with Reformed Cigars by selling all the blends and sizes available from Reformed Cigars, whether your palate prefers a full-bodied Maduro, a mild Connecticut, or somewhere in between. 1689cigars.com has a blend for you. While shopping at 1689cigars.com, check out their great t-shirts, stickers, glasses, and more. And be sure to check back regularly as they're adding new products all the time. 1689cigars.com. Smoke to the glory of God.
And tell them CrossPolitic sent you, because, they're amazing. Kyle, got a question here first. No, let me say this. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you. When I see men who are willing to be bold, especially when they are by themselves and facing a big behemoth like our federal government, and they take a stand and we get to talk to them and they're not dead yet, thank you.
They're not Epstein yet.
Yeah, I mean it, brother. Thank you. I appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, for real.
And may your reach increase, and that I pray that God gives you some success in what you're doing.
I would just say one thing.
No, I'm
May
not
he
done.
become Presbyterian.
No,
that's all. That's all.
I said success, right? That's what I mean. So
Success. He all encompassing.
I encompassed all of it. So I want to know from your position, this behemoth that we have, and it seems like this is an entity that we can't seem to control at all. There's no handles on it. So I know that you're running a play here. What is someone who doesn't have your skill set? What's the play that we run, or how do we engage where while we're being attacked by this entity, we can actually be able to fight back against it? Because I don't know what to do.
Yeah, that's not just a good question. That's the question, right? Yeah. I think that everybody who wants to call out the problem, but they don't have a solution, like you're not my guy, like you don't help me at all. So I would never bring a problem to my boss without a solution, or maybe a couple of them. Here's what I think needs to be done. Number one is that I become more faithful. I become more rooted in my spirituality and in my faith in Jesus because of what I've gone through. Yep. So adversity actually forges stronger faith. Nobody needs to look for it. Many people do, but not everybody needs to find that problem. Like they don't need to find the solution, rather, when they don't see a problem. Right now, we're dealing with a real problem. And as you just aptly stated, the people on the political left, the progressive leftists, actually think that God and government are the same. Yeah. They think that their rights come from government and not are God-given. Right. And that's a problem. And in fact, if you look at the sort of the tenets of leftism, you'll find that they would actually be able to be protected as a religion, what they call a sincerely held belief, under Title VII, the way the federal code is written. So that's what we're up against. That's a big, big problem. The answer for every person is going to be different, but I think the family of answers is we lost a lot of ground in 2020. I think that was one of the things that I almost lost my ability to go to church with a clear head. I was so frustrated that people were spacing out every other pew where I was, that people were scared to do the right thing, to get close together and to worship God and raise their voices and show their faces to each other.
Yeah.
And my mindset went to this, and I think this is the answer. Our ancestors in faith died for their faith. They were crucified, they were burned, they were, fed to lions. Yeah. They celebrated, the Eucharist in catacombs where there was rotting dead around them, because that's where they had to go underground to make it happen. This happened every time that faith has been persecuted, except in 2020. I think that Americans kind of rolled over in a lot of ways. Just hear me out across the country. I'm not specific.
Wow. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
I agree with you.
Oh, yeah.
I agree with you.
Oh, yes.
So people rolled over. And so the answer is we lost some ground. But we have a do-over, because we've been able to get that ground back if you want it. So the answer to the plan is as follows. Find out where the red line is. Draw it very clearly for yourself and for your family. Do not step over it no matter what happens, including up to your life. And that's a hard thing to say, so you do it in small increments. You don't accept that people tell you to be quiet. You don't accept censorship. You certainly don't self-censor, because that means you've internalized what the government is asking you to do. That means that you sort of tacitly acknowledge that they have the right to do that. Mm-hmm. So we can't do that. We can't give any ground. We have to know that we are going to take a stand. And I just covered this with my guys, but every human being has this sort of contrary nervous system interactions. One of them is called the parasympathetic and the other is called the sympathetic. The parasympathetic is sort of what they call feed and breed. That's when you're eating, that's when you're relaxed, that's when you're not facing a threat. The sympathetic is when you have a threat, when you encounter something that is a potential issue for you. And we always say that that's the fight or flight, but that's not exactly accurate. It's not just fight and flight, it's fight, flight, and freeze. And what we saw in this country is that the instinct is overwhelmingly, probably 80% plus, it's freeze. It's, I haven't thought of what the correct action is, so I'm going to do nothing. And that's very common. That's very common for people. That's why we have basic training in the military. The goal is to do what they call stress inoculation. They're going to show you something scary. They're going to show you how to respond to it. So when something scary comes your way, you respond to it the way you were trained.
You don't freeze.
We've got to train ourselves right now.
That's right.
And you can do that with prayer, and you can do that with your faith, but you can also do that with your mindset. You can decide, hey, I'm not going to put on a mask when someone tells me. I'm not going to abstain from going to worship services. We're going to open the door up, and we're going to raise our voices, and we're going to stand closer than 6 feet. We're going to hold hands, and we're going to say the Lord's Prayer. We're going to do the things that need to be done because we already know that they can't take that from us. And if they take our freedom, so be it. We need to really get close to the idea of white martyrdom. I brought up the idea that people died for their faith. That's called red martyrdom. But white martyrdom is kind of overlooked. And that just means you're going to be inconvenienced for a while. You might lose a paycheck. You might lose some friends. You might have some family members not speak to you. You might find that you are a social outcast in certain areas. So be it. That's the answer. The answer is you don't give any ground anymore, period. Because we don't have any more ground to give. You already got a do-over. Rarely do we get a mulligan in history.
That's right.
But we've got one. So that's where we're at right now. I think the answer is we don't accept it. And then we hold our politicians accountable. It doesn't matter if you think that outcomes are the right way to go. We can't operate as Christians as operationally moral people where the ends justify the means.
Right.
We have to be doing it the right way for the right reason right now. And then when it comes along, it comes along. People prayed for the end of abortion at the federal level for 50 plus years, and they were unsuccessful, and they were unsuccessful, and they finally got the Dobbs decision, which is like a moderate success, and it throws it to the states. Now you got more work to do. You just got 50 places to do it. So incremental progress is progress as long as you're doing it for the right reason at the right way. But accepting sort of like a quantum leap forward by doing it the wrong way is not how we do business. There's 2,000 years of history behind saying how you do business. So people can remember that there is a bigger truth with a capital T and not what's convenient today and what might work in the political sphere. So I like CrossPolitic because I think it says exactly the right order. You know,
I just found my favorite Catholic.
I got one more question.
Okay.
And then I know you've already gone past your time with us, Kyle, and appreciate it. But was there election fraud in 2020, and how do we think about 2024?
I'm trying to get this man killed for real. Oh my goodness.
So here's I don't have any proof of it, and I don't think the people that say they do generally do either. But I believe that there was because it seems like there was, and it wasn't investigated. That's what I do know. What I know is that the FBI has a thing called the Election Interference Task Force. These are task forces that are set up in every field office or every region, and their job is to investigate interference in the elections, like aptly named. The problem is that the people that might have been conservative, particularly in my former office in Washington Field, which is a big deal, were removed from these task forces based on proxy assumptions that they were conservative. And I'll give you the example. Wow. There was a long-term agent. He had a decade worth of experience in this field. He had like 9 kids. He was assumed to be a religious person based on that, which is a pretty good assumption, it turns out. Right. And then based on the fact that he was probably religious, he was probably a Trump voter, and he was removed. Now, this is a real public story, okay? Because there are people like a guy who was the assistant special agent in charge of that squad. His name was Timothy T-Ball. He was removed from his job for political tweets against Trump. And he was quoted by people that I trust that were in that office as saying, I'm not going to have any, GD Trump supporters on my election fraud task force. So they've actually come out and told us in no uncertain terms what their priorities are at this point. The DOJ has stated that they have no interest in finding election fraud. What they're interested in is election suppression or voter suppression, which is a civil rights issue, which is good to the base that goes on the political left. But they're not interested in finding fraud. And for me, that admission tells us the priorities tell me exactly what they're willing to look at and what they're not willing to look at. Yeah. So I have no doubt that there will be fraud again.
That's helpful.
I have no doubt that they will try to run the game. The question is this: what are we going to do about it? Because we already saw nobody do anything. And I'm not sure that there's a peaceful way to resolve that situation. I've been advocating for a revolution in this country based on the 10th Amendment, which is a little bit more nuanced than a lot of people who say, let's grab guns and go fight. I do have a Betsy Ross flag over my shoulder, as you guys probably can see. And I do have some, antique weapons here from the Civil War era. And I've got some old looking cool stuff. And I got some tomahawks. Like, I'm a big gun guy. I've got a lot of guns. I have more than 50. I think I have less than 100, but somewhere in that range.
That got lost in a boating accident?
I have them all. I don't even there are more 4473s with my name on it than the ATF is comfortable with. They have actually done investigations. They have knocked on my door. I will own that. And if they want to come to my door, I will tell them to piss off because they have no right to be there. But at the end of the day, the 10th Amendment revolution is not bearing arms against our government. It's having our politicians that are in local and state offices do the jobs that they are told to do, and looking at the Constitution for guidance. The 10th Amendment tells us that whatever is not laid out and given to the federal government, they don't have access to it. It's not in their purview. And we need to start doing that. Department of Education is a big one. There's a lot of things the government does at the federal level that it has no right to do based on the Bill of Rights. And if people could just remember their basic history, we had a Federalist and an Anti-Federalist group. And it's great to go read the Federalist Papers and know why we wrote the Constitution, why it had to be a strong central government. Then remember that the Anti-Federalists were correct. And they're the ones who gave us a Bill of Rights. And what they said is the government can't be trusted. It must be delineated specific areas that it cannot infringe upon, like our ability to speak, our ability to practice our faith, that you have freedom of religion, not from religion, that the state can't implement it, but they can't stop you from doing any part of your religion. That's a big deal, right? And at the end of it, they said, anything that we didn't say is a right that's given to the government specifically, they don't have it. It's the states. So our states need to stand up and start stepping in the gap between those. And it needs to be probably a state that's very red, that has some cojones that wants to step into the space. It's not going to be Texas or Florida, I don't think. It's going to be like a South Dakota or maybe an Idaho or a Montana that goes, we have a small population. These people want to live in a certain way, and we are going to make sure that there are no federal overreaches on our watch. That's where it has to start. And then people will the smaller dominoes will knock over the bigger ones as they go.
That's right.
Kyle,
That's right.
The only answer. Give us your website, give us your podcast, give us how we can track and follow with you, whatever that is, let us know.
All right. So people can follow me on social media, which I hate, but I do it begrudgingly at Kyle Seraphin. It's just my full name. And then the podcast is on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. And if they want to send me snarky comments or sarcastic remarks, they can do that at kyleseraphin.com. And there's a contact me form where you can send it and I'll just read it and I'll decide whether or not I want to respond or not.
Send this man more ammo. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us, man. Really appreciate you. All right, if you're single, get married. If you're married, have you some kids. And if you have kids, go baptize them. Until next time, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is CrossPolitic.